All right, now it's time for my explainer tonight, and it's all about stimulus packages. Now, the president last week announced a second stimulus package to help shore up the economy and cushion Kenyans and their businesses from the adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. But before we go into whether these new measures will be helpful and how you will benefit from his proposals, it is important for us to understand the basics first. So, just what is a stimulus package and what is it supposed to do? Well, a stimulus package is defined as a series of economic measures to reinvigorate the economy and prevent or reverse a recession. Now, a stimulus package is defined as a series of economic measures to do just that, and it aims at boosting employment and increasing the amount of money in people's pockets and thereby increasing spending. Now, there are three ways to do this. One approach is what is known as a monetary stimulus. This involves cutting interest rates. Now, this reduces the cost of borrowing, meaning more people and their businesses will take up loans. The more people borrow, the more money they've got for their businesses. And of course, that then works to their advantage. Now, it means that they're able to spend more. It means that there is increased money supply, or rather the amount of money in the economy is increased. Now, in the first stimulus package announced by President Kenyatta, we saw this in play when the CBK lowered the central bank rate to 7.25% to reduce the cost of borrowing, and the cash reserve ratio was also reduced to 4.25% to provide what is known as additional liquidity of 35 billion to the banks. So that meant they have more money available to lend. Now let's take a look at the second approach that a government can choose, and it's called a fiscal stimulus. Now, here, what they're trying to do is stimulate the economy by reducing taxes or increasing government spending, or both. Now, if you reduce the taxes, then you increase the amount of disposable income in people's pockets, right? So this means they can spend more money. Now, on the other hand, when you increase government spending, it means there is more money to go around, or more money that is circulating in the economy. So small businesses are making money, they're able to keep their employees rather than let them go, and perhaps they're even able to employ more if they need to. Now that, of course, you understand, will reduce the rate of unemployment. People keep their jobs. They spend more because they have salaries and they have wages. Now, if you're wondering whether we have done this, yes, we did. And that is what you saw in the first stimulus package, with the reduction of payee from 30% to 25%, corporation tax down to 25%, turnover tax, or TOT, from 3% to 1% for small businesses. And of course, also VAT going down 2 percentage points, and tax relief for those who are earning below 24,000. As for increased government spending, that's what we saw with the 1 billion shillings to recruit additional health workers. Now, the final measure of a stimulus is what is known as quantitative easing. I know it's a big word, but this is simply what it means. The government buys financial assets, for example, bonds from commercial banks. Now, because it's bought them from the banks have increased their excess reserves. They have more money to spend, more money to lend to you and I. And as we said before, the more they lend, the more money circulates, the lower the interest rates. Now, quantitative easing, I'm told by economists, is a method that is used when the monetary stimulus that we talked about at the start is no longer effective. Okay? So that is what a stimulus package is. Now, I want us to take a look at the second stimulus package that was announced by the president. Here are some unique things that we did not hear from the first package. All right? 5 billion shillings to hire local labor for rehabilitation of roads. 6.5 billion to hire 10,000 teachers and 1,000 interns. 1.7 billion going to healthcare to expand bed capacity in public hospitals. 3 billion to boost farming by providing farm inputs. And then, of course, there was also the tourism sector that we know has been hard hit. They're going to be able to get some soft loans And then, of course, there was also 2.4 billion for wells and water pans, and well over $500 million to purchase locally made cars. Now, all of this comes to the grand total, as you can see on your screen, of 53.7 billion shillings. Now, that is what that looks like. Now, there's the second stimulus package that we have talked about, right? That is what we didn't see. But here's something that we did see. All right, and it seems like a bit of a replication and has many people asking questions. Now, if you recall, the first stimulus package in March talked about 10 billion shillings within 3 weeks to settle VAT refund claims, and this was to be expedited within 3 weeks. Curiously, we saw the same thing again in the second stimulus package. Again, 10 billion shillings for VAT refunds and other pending payments to SMEs. That is interesting. We'll be talking about that with Kwame Owino in just a moment. But then we also saw the 3 billion from the credit guarantee scheme. This is not necessarily something new. It's just something that's being operationalized and was announced by President Uhuru Kenyatta during his State of the Nation address in 2019. Now, all of this money, all of this 53.7 billion shillings that we're talking about, it won't be available immediately. It's important for you to understand why. Now, this circular that you can see from the National Treasury to the Clerk of the National Assembly explains. Now, it is a request for that additional 53.7 for post-COVID stimulus program. It's been added as an amendment to the budget estimates for the next financial year. That's 2020-2021. So you know what this means, huh? This means that it'll have to wait for the budget reading statement by the CS Treasury in Parliament in June. And you know it goes through the entire process of subsequent debates by the MPs before it is passed. So that means that 53.7 billion that has been proposed will not be available now, but somewhere between July and August at the earliest. And so there is the question, of course, hearing today from the CBK that just said this afternoon, actually, that many small companies will be in critical situation by June. So let's get some more understanding on this now that you understand what a stimulus package is. And we've gone through the first and the second stimulus packages from Kwame Owino, who is our economist. And he's an economist from the Institute for Economic Affairs. Now, many people are asking whether, a couple of questions, whether, one, all of these measures will be enough. Is 53.7 billion shillings enough to stimulate the economy? Here's another thing that is interesting that Kenyans are asking. Is the payment of pending bills and the VAT refunds considered a stimulus, considering these are payments that were owed to small businesses all the way from last year? Remember, we've heard the president time and again talking about pending bills. Are these enough? And that is why we want to speak to economist Kwame Owino on the same. Kwame, good evening. Thank you for speaking with us tonight. So my first question is a bit of a loaded one. So companies will be in distress by June. This is according to CBK. They're citing a survey. This money will be available somewhere between July and August, much, much later. Also, does the payment of pending bills classify as a stimulus at this time?
Well, certainly not. I mean, if government owes money and pays it back, obviously that cannot be part of the stimulus, because, as you said, the stimulus is actually meant to create new activity and to allow for businesses to take new capacity, to add their capacity and actually to use existing capacity. So if you've had a business that was owed money, whether through a VAT refund or for supplies, and you pay it now, it does not amount to a stimulus, because we haven't added new capacity to what already exists. So I think it's all being put together to make the stimulus look larger, the amount that's spent to look larger than it really is.
Yes, and 53.7 billion shillings, is that enough? And also, remember, this is part of the next financial year's budget. Parliament could make amendments, could make reallocations, could shoot it down. What are your thoughts on that amount of money?
Okay. Well, it's not clear. I think one of the things that government should have done is, in addition to the 53 billion shillings, is to publish a paper saying this is how we expect, yes, the money to actually bring in new activity. But since there isn't, all we have is this 8-point plan, and we can try to reason from it. So the first thing it tells us is that if you look at what a stimulus is, and what are considered the most successful ones, more recently we had Canada, we had the US, and many other countries having a stimulus. Many of them were spending money equivalent to about 5 to 10% of GDP. That's huge. 53 billion spent over the next financial year would be less than 1% of GDP. So I'm not too sure. That that it will be a sufficient stimulus. But nevertheless, what it suggests is perhaps government doesn't think that the growth will be so badly affected after this first quarter is done, and therefore 53 billion will be sufficient. But if you ask me, 53 billion is unlikely to be an effective stimulus given how far companies have sunk, especially if you take out the fact that 10 billion is actually not new money. It's businesses being paid for supplies that they've already done, or VAT refunds to businesses, and many of them have been waiting for more than a year.
All right, Kwame, it's no secret in this country that our economy was not in a good place pre-COVID. Does a stimulus work in an economy that's already in distress such as ours?
Well, it just means that the convergence of these four factors, so we have COVID emergency, we had the floods, we had
the
locusts, and obviously the economy was soft towards the end of the year. So when all those four factors come together that are knocked with COVID, it means that we are just much deeper down. And what worries us at the Institute of Economic Affairs is that at the beginning of the year, the growth rates would be approaching 6% and above. Right now, some consensus forecasts actually suggest that if we get to 2, we'll be very lucky. So that growth output change is so big, and our thinking is that 53 billion alone is unlikely to be a sufficient stimulus if the intention is to get us back to the growth path that we'd had was expected.
All right. Would you have wanted to hear some more detail? Because they talked about soft loans, particularly for the tourism sector. And we've just seen today, a couple of hotels, the Fairmont has sent all their workers home. I mean, tourism has been hard hit. Would you have wanted to see some more specifics in terms of staving this off? Unemployment perhaps in tourism?
Oh, yes. I mean, the unfortunate thing is what the closure of a big chain such as Fairmont tells us is that even if this help was going to come, I don't think it's sufficient, but it's coming too late in the day. This is something that should have been here with us as soon as the curfews and obviously the limited lockdown, as we Kenyans called it, was announced. It was very clear that idle capacity was going to be there, and many businesses, together with the fact that we didn't have tourists coming in, so all that clash meant that if you're going to provide help, it should have been much, much earlier. I think many of these firms have made the decision that, look, we cannot continue to run liabilities. I'd rather we close down. It's sad, but obviously they're closing down. The other point is that these big institutions are probably going to weather the next 2 or 3 months or even more. I think there are smaller micro and small enterprises that are going down, and they probably will not come back. That's the unfortunate bit.
Yeah, you're right. And they probably won't be covered. In the beginning, you talked about, countries where this has worked, like Canada. Could you tell us a little bit more about how they've done it? I mean, obviously, we can't compare to these countries. They have surpluses in their economies. We're, working on a deficit year on year. KRA has not met its targets, unlikely to, meet its targets by the end of this financial year. But what have you seen working elsewhere? What have they done? And if you were to make these decisions, what would you do for Kenya?
Well, okay, let's start with the fact that what Canada, the US, and many other countries have done has not proven to be successful yet. I think the logic is okay, but they haven't shown yet. But the classical success was in 2009, as soon as President Obama was elected, the US economy had a slump, which was also a very big one. And so they had to come in quickly. So he came up with a $767 billion. It was called the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, a very big one. Yes, came back, and it had 3 components. One, there was a tax cut. The second was a support to small and micro enterprises. Basically, one is a tax cut. Small and micro enterprises were supported, and the other was investment in services, just basically education and stuff like that. So, and the US economy, of course, which chose to expand its deficit, actually recovered much earlier. Jobs took a while, but recovered much earlier than the European economies which chose austerity. Telling you that there's something to be done about a well-designed stimulus. It wasn't perfect. A few people still blame it, but on the whole, the US recovered much better, much earlier, and that might have been responsible for President Obama's re-election. So that's first. So what does it mean? I think the US, Canada, and all these other countries that we talked about had an advantage. They had some space, what we call fiscal space, in the sense that they didn't have very big deficits, even if they had debts. We did not have that. In the sense that Kenya's deficit was already about 6% of GDP, when the safest level is about 3.5% or lower. So we didn't have a lot of space, and the economy was already going soft. So all these things all together means that if your economy is not run well on a day-to-day basis, when you face a shock such as this, you don't have sufficient space to actually run many things, and that's how come government is rushing back to negotiate deals with the IMF and the World Bank, which is okay. This is what they exist for. And that kind of support is coming in at this time, but they have to be negotiated agreements. And that's the point. So basically, our economic management over the last 5 years has caught up with us, or let me say poorer management has caught up with us, because we'd already loaded too much debt to begin with.
Right. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Kwame Owino, for your insights on that. Kwame Owino from the Institute for Economic Affairs on the economic stimulus packages that have been announced by the president. We'll wait to see, of course, once Parliament passes that into law in the next financial year. Kwame, thank you very much. That's our explainer this evening.